First of all, thank you so much for doing an amazing job on the series, Masters of the Air. I truly enjoyed the entire series as well as your work in it, which is very, very detailed. So thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate that.
Thank you. It was a great job to do. It was really inspirational to work with all the young guys and to research and explore the world of the 100th bomb squad and all the people that supported it in the UK and the US.
Wonderful. How did you get involved on this project, Colleen? I would love to hear the story behind it.
I got involved because I knew the production team from Playtone, Gary Getzman. I've worked with several times from back in the Jonathan Demme days and up until the present over the years, and I've done a couple projects with Tom. So that was how I became part of the show.
Wonderful. And had you done something similar to like a World War II or set in that time
No,
period at least?
I'd never done a real war kind of thing at all. I've kind of always wanted to, but I'd never really had the opportunity
And
to
w
do that.
was that a challenge that you were pretty much take getting ready to take on, or was there a sense of nervousness involved behind that?
Well, it was a huge project. I've done a lot of big things, but it was really one of the biggest projects I've ever done, if not the biggest. So there was like, you wanted to do a good job with what you were dealing with and do it right.
Mm,
I had military people helping me, but I wanted to also have it look real and have it be kind of aged and broken down in a way that I felt that a lot of war stuff really isn't.
mm,
Um, so I kind of wanted it to really feel like visceral and good in a way that
right.
that that I could do it. I started on the movie way ahead of time because I had to make all the leather goods for the show. There weren't enough of them in the world, to dress guys, and so I started with that with a company in the UK called Eastman, and we started with, he had a lot of original samples and things like that, so I could look at all the different styles and different ways that different um, leathers were made, and um, and um, and sort of research it that way.
I have spoken to Captain Dale Dye twice. Once last year, just about Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers and the Pacific, and spoke to him a few weeks ago as well about obviously this project. How is it working like with him? Because you said you worked with the military personnel. I'm assuming it was him.
Well, no, I did work with him, of course, but he came in and did and he was around, but I had a guy that was actually a costumer that worked with military from the UK
Mm,
who had been whose father had been lived near where Thorpe Habits was, and whose family had been sort of part of the American family of Thorpe Habits just because they were there. His grandfather was there during the war, and they embraced the American soldiers and the airplanes and all that. And he'd grown up in that culture, and it was his niche thing. His name is Mark Allman, but it was his thing that he loved the most in the world. So it was really, you know, he was really the person in my area of costuming that I relied on, as opposed to Dale, who was more into like,
yeah,
how everything's set up in the rooms and all that
yeah.
stuff. So he wasn't really my guy in the sense that Mark was.
Got it. I come from a military family as well, and as a kid, I remember I used to wear a military uniform just, because my dad was in the army and it was the cool thing to do at the time. And, the attention to detail is just mind-boggling in every part of the series. And one thing that I see people talking about online, um, aside from, the story and the visuals, is obviously the production design, art direction, but more so the costume, because a lot of people online used to be in the military or had their grandfathers who had served in the U.S. military or British Army in World War II. So I think you truly have hit a home run, your te entire team in
Oh,
doing
thanks.
so. And people take those things for granted. I mean, but it's a whole wholesome thing, right? And it adds up to the
Oh
story.
yeah. And it's a
What
lot of moving parts all the time. You're keeping track. We've got, we had over, almost 1,000 speaking parts in the show, 300 of which were really featured. So it's a lot of guys in uniforms and their interpretation of them that that you want to make real.
Yeah. And the biggest challenge in any kind of project, is continuity, but especially with these kind of with this 10-part series or 9-part series, and you have all these costumes and these outfits that you have to make sure that to the crease of the outfit, everything stays consistent. How do you kind of deal with that? Obviously, aside from having a great team, just to make sure the continuity stays throughout, and it did.
Well, I think the people on set watched it. The actors themselves were very conscious of it, and they kind of built their character on different, aspects of tidiness or untidiness, depending on who they were. Luckily, I had the jackets covering a lot of shirts and things like that, which at least that stuff stays pretty much the same. Um, so it wasn't really a, such a big issue as it sounds
Okay,
from the outside.
got it.
Um, it's definitely was part of it, but it wasn't really a problem, in that way because everyone kind of self-disciplined themselves in how they wore their costumes.
That's awesome. That's great to hear.
Yeah, they
What?
really embraced it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with also when you go through the boot camp training and it teaches you that whole mindset of
Right.
being in the military and just trying to make sure that you're presentable. It just changes everything in your head.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
in what, you obviously worked for how many years from pre-production to the obviously the production. That's where your part ended. Was it like 3, 4 years or longer?
No, not for me. For me, 9 months prep and a 9 month shoot. So it was 18 months
Okay.
about. For
What,
post production is
obviously.
editing and all that stuff
Yeah.
happens after.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes the length of it longer.
Right. What was the most challenging part, whether it was in pre-production that you can remember or in production, that, there's so many, like you said, moving parts. There's always things that go wrong. I mean, when I'm on set working on a film, things go wrong all the time. That's an inevitable thing. What was something that you remember, and how did your team and you overcame that? Any story that you remember specifically?
Well, what happened, I don't have a specific antidote per
Sure.
se like that, because it felt like that all the time. But a lot of times what happened is we'd be shooting a unit we were prepped for from the first block of directors, and then all of a sudden the second block of directors we were shooting at the same time. So we
Mm,
had to take the guys, halfway through the day and change them into the outfits for the other directors for their scene. So it was a lot of juggling of costumes. Now, the principles it was pretty good with because you kind of knew with the background it was always a challenge and always a kind of a new thing, and it wasn't something that we knew about ahead of time so much. Because many clothes as we had, we never had enough. It was always something, and I really think for me and my team, the biggest challenge was really as you're shooting these huge epics, maybe shooting two or three the same day, you're prepping for the next one. And by the time we got, to the eighth or ninth one, it was so stacked up that there wasn't enough crew to even do it. It was so big and crazy. And, we're doing Germans over in one corner, Russians somewhere else, and the Americans on the base somewhere else at the same day with the same crew of people. So trying to figure out how to spread everybody around and make it happen was a logistical nightmare.
I bet. How big is your team?
My team fluctuated from probably in the beginning it starts quite small, but
Hmm.
it fluctuates during shooting.
I'm kind of going back and forth. I'm gonna shift off from Masters of Sarah. Just in general, Colleen, what inspires you? Like, what inspires something for you to work to get ideas? Like, what do you look for? Did you look for any references in any of the past series, Band of Brothers Pacific, Saving Private Ryan, or anything else? What's your process like that when you're given the job? How do you tackle it?
I just I looked at anything that had to do with the Army Air, different military for those shows. Obsessed with how they worked and where they, what the bases look like in America, what they look like in the UK, and the equipment that came from England in the beginning, and how because we were short of things in the beginning of the war, how we utilized British equipment matched with the American equipment, and then we built it up, and all that part of it was sort of my main research and just visual research. There's a lot of good research from the Thorpe Abbotts Museum. They have really good archives. So looking at their stuff, which was, the real guys in situ, was way more valuable than looking at other movies and stuff to me.
Right. Did you have any family that served in any war or World War II? Like,
My dad was in the Navy in the Pacific in the Second World War, and then he also was in the Korean War in the
mm,
Aleutian Islands. So he had a double whammy. He got home for like 2 years and then had to go again. So that my grandfather was my great grandfather was in the Lafayette Escadrille. He was a pilot in the First World War, which was a whole other thing. But he was, none of them were military other than in the war. They didn't have a military career or anything.
mm. Did you hear any stories from your dad or your granddad growing up that you kind of remembered?
Never,
Never. They don't talk about it, I
never.
know.
No, they didn't talk about it.
My dad, I still don't know what he did other than what he did in the office. He never talks about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my
Uh,
dad would never bring it up. He would just not a thing, he just, I guess he just wanted to forget about it.
yeah. But were there any photographs that you looked at that may have given you any kind of inspiration from his time and his grandfather's time that you may have had?
Not really. I had like, there was a picture of my dad, like a goofy picture of him and his brother both looking like they were in a, really young in their uniforms. My uncle was in the Air Force and my dad was in the Navy, but it's kind of a brother shot,
Mm,
of them. But there wasn't a lot of documentation in the family of military kind of things.
right, right. Um, and what was something that you got even though your dad and your granddad served in the Navy and the military, as just a human being at an individual level, what did you learn about the whole idea of, soldiers and wars and military?
How so? I mean, you mean from books or from Hemingway or
No,
from,
no,
you know,
from working on the series, like something that really taught you something new that you didn't know before.
well, I didn't know anything about, I knew that these kids were driving a tractor one year and the next year they were flying airplanes. So that part was, you know, the reality of watching that happen with, even though it was pretend, was something that, you kind of hear about, but you don't really get how
Mm,
devastating, that experience is for people, I don't think. And I think that's kind of was my takeaway from it, uh, as much as anything, it
right,
made
right,
me, you know, it made me realize that, you know, that the youth of that generation was really young and really before most Americans ever traveled anywhere in the world. It sort of opened the world to America in a way because they did go overseas and saw something besides their home state, that it really changed how we looked at the world in America.
right. Right. Um, Was there anything in the pre-production stage when you were doing all the prep work, the, research, or even when the script was kind of going through the stages that it goes through, was there any, one of the things I've read about online, and again, people have opinions, but I'm just kind of curious, that, Band of Brothers is one of those series, I'm not sure if you've seen that, where they do a lot of setup, like how people get into where they get into their backstories a little bit more deeper,
Right.
as opposed to Master of the Year. You kind of brought up the point about these kids were, farmers, and then they kind of were flying planes. Was there any kind of that element in any of the work that you were doing that was in the early stages that then it kind of got shifted over?
Not particularly because by the time I got them in the store, they were already in the war. They weren't anywhere else. You didn't have the flashback thing like Band of Brothers or, that
Mhm.
that setup.
To kind of just talk about, I don't want to talk about any particular scenes because I know we're not allowed to, so I'm going to stay away from that. We don't want to give away anything. But
Yeah,
episode
I got a
one,
lot more to go.
yep, yep. I mean, I wish I could because I've seen the entire series and I absolutely loved it. But
Yeah.
episode one and two, which is obviously the premiere episode combined into two, w- w- do you remember the first day when you got on the set and the vibe and the feel that you got? Do you remember that experience?
Well, I think that like once you got everybody there and you were looking at this giant airplane they made for the movie
Mm,
and you kind of went, you just kind of got a feel for the scale of it all. You kind of knew it was coming. But when you actually got out there with everybody standing around and figuring out what they were doing and dressed in their thing and getting in the airplanes, you really kind of had a feeling that you were suddenly in this world that you were going to be in for the next 9 months of your life.
yeah. Did you go inside the B-17, the model, and at least
Oh
where they
yeah,
shot? Yeah.
I went inside where when they were building it and stuff when I was in, before it was finished, because I had to see how the guys were going to fit in there, like how little space there really was for people. And our guys, like Callum's pretty tall, so it was like, here he is in this huge jacket, getting in this little tiny space. So it was just double checking that everything, we put stuff on people and had them walk through and do stuff to make sure it all worked. So when we were really doing it, it didn't look goofy.
Yeah. I mean, it must be an incredible feeling, even though it's a model plane, but it's from another time. Like it's almost what, 80 years ago now, like, right? And to be in that presence and to have that around you, and then to see all the people that you and your team have put in these incredible costumes. Was it a very surreal feeling just being in that moment?
I think by the time I got in the moment, I'd been in that moment so many times with the fittings and all that that it
So
was
you
not
were
a
okay.
surreal moment. It was a
Got
huge
it.
relief more than a surreal moment. I mean, it was a feeling of joy and happiness.
Yeah, I bet. And just like a lot of mini series, including this one, there's different directors, right? The vision is all
Correct.
one, right? The vision is all one, and you kind of talked about that how you were going from location to location, but still every director brings something new, right? Because they have a different personality, they're different people. How di Not necessarily difficult or easy, but how is it working from here to there and, adjusting to different directors' work ethics and workflows and their personalities?
Well, it was pretty smooth actually because we transitioned, you know, quickly and it was just sort of the guys remained the same, the actors and everything was the same. So we were a
Yeah.
world and these directors would come into it and to do their angle on the story or their take on their particular thing. And you would just go to them, talk to them. And maybe partly because it was a military thing, so it's uniforms, and they would just go, just keep doing what you're doing. It looks great. This is what I want. This is what I want. I want to add that. I'd like this. But it was all very copacetic and pretty, their prep time wasn't that long. So we were ahead of the curve. We were prepared for them before they landed and got there and started, you know, prepping and directing. So they do it. I mean, those guys that do that work are pretty amazing because they do it pretty quickly. like
Yeah.
figuring it out, landing, uh, and start directing it like a huge mass of people around a gigantic field of storytelling.
Right. Filmmaking is a collaborative effort, just like, military itself. Like it's probably,
Yeah, definitely.
the way the
It's
film
similar.
it is. It's like a hierarchy of, everybody has their jobs and they have to report to a certain individual who has to report to a certain individual. And, in that frame of mind, and especially when you're working with cinematographer and there's a production designer, lighting, how collaborative is it? Just as an example, it doesn't have to be Masters of the Year. Like, do you remember just working with the other teams? Which team were you the most closely working with on the production days?
I think, obviously the director and we collaborate closely with the prop department because guns and weaponry and all that stuff is a prop, not our department. um, all the different accoutrements like the gas masks and those things were shared, was a shared responsibility. But because of people warm, we mainly, were dealing with the day-to-day maintenance of them and the things like that. But those were kind of, and the art department, just kind of what the sets were like and the mood around the thing. But it was, the interaction day to day was probably mainly with cropping, just making sure everything was right and that they had the right stuff for us, we had the right stuff for them, and keeping that moving forward.
Right. And I'm just curious. I'm always curious about people's journeys because we all have our journeys. How did you get in? What inspired you to get into what you do right now? I mean, you were doing it for quite some time, but do you remember what inspired you to be who you are today?
Well, I think that I always loved movies growing up, but I had no idea, that I would ever or could ever work on one. But I
Yeah.
think that when I was like in in my early 20s, I I became a fan of a lot of the Italian New Wave movies, like Il Gattopardo,
Mm,
Kurosawa's movies. I started watching movies, and I was working in fashion at the time. I'd studied art. I kind of wanted to be an artist, but I had to make a living. So I didn't, pursue that. And I ended up, falling in love with these movies. And when the time came and I had a opportunity to move to New York, I moved to New York and, you know, started from the ground up to begin life working on movies.
right.
And because I'd worked with clothing, it was just the
The right
zen
fit.
place to go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's quite cool. I mean, I think I've spoken to a few costume designers on different projects, and more or less they all have the similar kind of path that how they love movies and they're doing the
Oh,
fashion, and then you kind of just merge the two. But
yeah.
and in your career where you are right now, obviously, you're at a very different place than you were when you began. Do you look back sometimes and, that moment, like how far I've come to be where I am today, and obviously the hard work that it took for you to get from there to here? Like, do you cherish those times?
You know what? I don't think that way. It's just
Okay.
not, I'm just like grateful, for the life that I have and feel really lucky and the collaborations with different directors and different kinds of people that I've worked with in the world.
Right.
And I think it's really, I'm just super, super lucky really to be doing what I do. And grateful to people that have helped me in the past, but also I don't spend time like I'm not very nostalgic, I guess, as a person.
Fair enough. That's fine. I mean, you have some immense credits, right? Like you worked on films like Memoirs of a Geisha with Rob Marshall, Chicago, tons of other stuff that you worked on. And I think another one that I remember was The Huntsman. I think it was one of those movies that you did also. I mean, your credit list is
I did
huge.
two Huntsman's movies, yeah. No,
Yeah.
I've done a lot of big shows of all different kinds. So, you know, but always fun and always learning something new, and not getting put in a niche is a really important part of my life, I think, in my work.
I'm glad you said that because in the film industry, you always get kind of like pigeonhole or typecasted because if you make one film, then you make another film like that, then that's all you're gonna get. And
Yeah,
how were you able to sort of, expand your path into different ways? Was it a lot of no's that you had to do, or you still do, or was it just everything kind of came to you in a very blessed way?
it just kind of came to me in a random, happenstance way, with different directors that have different. Like Rob did Chicago, he did Memoirs of a Geisha, he did A Little Mermaid. The directors, not only me, but the directors that I worked with, Tim Burton, like those areas
Right.
all over the place. These guys do all different kinds of movies. So luckily for me, they still want to hire me on them, then I can do them with them. And then you do one kind, and somebody, random stuff resonates with different directors. It's not the obvious always. So, it's always interesting to see where it comes from, and, how it, how it, how it pans out. But I think that I've been really lucky in the people that have, that have liked me over the years.
Perfect. Have you seen the entire series, the completed series?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Um,
sat and watched it, and I did a 3 hours, like three at a time. I did three, and three. So I've seen the whole thing when it was. I haven't seen it on a big screen, but I've seen it on a
right.
pretty big TV screen.
Yeah. I'm just curious, without talking about the episode specifics, was there any episode that you enjoyed as an audience and also enjoyed from the standpoint of working on that episode and kind of remembering the backstories behind it, or was it all the same for you?
It kind of was like a giant movie for me more
Yeah.
than an episodic.
I
So
felt the
for
same
me, it
way.
wasn't. Yeah, for me, it didn't really. I didn't really have that feeling for it at all. It was a kind of a flow.
And did you see it with any of your family members or friends, or was it just
No, I saw it at the, where they were editing it at Playtone.
oh, okay, okay, wonderful. Have your family, I mean, you have got such a great body of work, not that you need to make a point to anybody, especially people around you, like closer to you, but has any of your family members seen the first two episodes at least? The ones that are on Apple TV
Yeah, for
Plus?
sure. They all have. They all love it. Yeah, they're all like fans. So, so they've all watched it and enjoyed it.
Wonderful. And what's next for you, Colleen?
Well, I'm working on a Paul Thomas Anderson movie at the moment, which I'm going to the
Oh,
airport to go to set. So, I'm working on that, and I'm doing the costumes for Jennifer Lopez for Kiss of the Spider Woman that Bill Condon's directing.
oh, I'm a huge Paul Thomas Anderson fan. I mean, who isn't? That's incredible. Is it
Yeah,
the
he's
first time you're
special.
working with him, or you've worked with him before?
Yeah. No, I've never worked with him before.
And how is he just as a, I mean, we know, but I just want to hear it from you because you're working directly with him. How is he different, not in a bad or a good way, from working with other people that you have sort of worked with?
Well, he's a real auteur, so it's his world. He shoots the movie, he writes the movie, he directs the movie. So it's a very, you know, it's a very small kind of tighter collaboration than with a lot of other directors.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is correct. I believe it is because I was speaking to, well, I saw it that Beetlejuice 2 is in production, and I spoke to Bo
Yeah,
Welch. Okay, so you are working on it. Okay.
it's done though. It's almost, it'll be out in the fall, I think, but it's through filming.
Okay, so it's in post-production. Well, again, I don't want to talk about the film specifically, but you've worked with Tim Burton before. Um, you've seen the Beetlejuice originally. Was that something that experience of working on something like that came out almost what 35 years ago, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, yeah, it was a long time ago.
Okay.
It was great.
Perfect.
You know, it was fun to revisit it and do what we did with it. And I think people are really gonna love what Tim did with the movie. I think it's really gonna be funny.
Wonderful. Well, I'm looking forward to Paul Thomas Anderson movie. I think that stars DiCaprio and Sean Penn.
Yeah.
And really excited about that. But thank you so much for first of all giving your
Thank
valuable
you. Sorry about
time.
my bad technology.
No, 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 no. I really appreciate the fact that you're on your way to the airport and you're still given the time. So it really means a lot. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. And do come back for another episode. Until then, have a great day.